Hi all. I feel it's my kind of duty and responsibility to cover Leela Decisive games. This is a bit of a long one, I have to warn you ahead. I'll be using fast forward later during this game. So this was against Fizbo 1.9, Leela ID 11089. So this is in the Chess.com Computer Championship, Rapid Rumble, 15 minutes with a 5-second time increment. So let's have a look. Leela playing white plays d4. Fizbo plays d5. I believe Fizbo, by the way, is after a clown, like Fizbo the clown, perhaps. So will there be some clowning around in this game? c4, e6, knight c3, c6, e4 is played. Now this has been played quite recently in a high-level Magnus Carlsen game against Fujian, believe it or not. So more normal is knight f3 in my book, as in this has been played more frequently, and white's thought to be having a slight edge in this kind of variation. Or e3, and then committing it, well, can sort of transpose anyway into the same sort of thing. But yeah, e4, interesting. It's kind of a paradox of this opening, kind of rule-breaking opening sequence, because this knight is moving more than once in the opening, and you might think it's a bit on the extravagant side to move back here, but it's kind of done the job of getting rid of that d5 pawn. And Fujian actually against Magnus Carlsen played c5 here. That game is video annotated on this channel actually, and just as a recap, if you want a quick recap of that game, it went like this. Just check out the video for annotations on this game, but just I'll give you the gist position. Basically, Magnus won in a grinding endgame eventually. Yeah, actually he won it in a rook and pawn ending. So that move 58. So knight f6 anyway was played by Fizbo. So we have a3, prompting the bishop to capture on c3. B takes. So white out of the opening has the bishop pair, some structural damage clearly. Will the dark square bishop in particular be great for white? Let's have a look. Knight bd7, knight f3, black castles. Interesting plan now. Structurally, this you could also say is a bit of a weakness. It's pushed, and here it's actually pushed again. b6, bishop d3. It's left to be dissolved, but by taking that, Fizbo is fracturing the pawn chain. So maybe that's job done as a positional kind of sacrifice. Yeah, positional pawn sacrifice for structural damage. But with the bishop pair, it also opens up the dark square bishop. Well, it should do in theory. White castles, bishop b7, rook e1, rook c8. We have knight e5 now, not minding knight takes e5 at all. Black actually undoubled white's pawns here with this. Just have a quick look at knight takes e5, d takes. This is a little bit dangerous. There's a fantasy variation I've got for you here, which goes like this. Queen h3 against things like knight e5 against the bishop. The bishop's protected here. Now let's imagine f5, queen g3 offering c3. This is just fantasy, but you can see the bishop pair now at work, and h4 could be used to chip away at the black king. So this kind of thing could be very dangerous. You can see the bishop, the dark square bishop, triumphs in this variation. This is just a fictional variation, but it crashes through. Yeah, it's too dangerous to take here, because then that's like mating. So let's imagine rook takes and take this a bit further, check, and white ends up with an advantage in that totally fictional variation. But look, you know, Leela uses an MCTS search, which can be very, very deep and fictional in its own right, because it's just with the evaluations coming from the neural network. So if my annotation style is slightly different, it does reflect kind of MCTS style, deep and yeah, getting into the depths of the dynamic possibilities. So anyway, let's continue. C takes, knight takes, rook takes is played. So here clearly can't take here because the bishop takes h7 check. If you haven't seen that tactic before, brush up on it. So we have bishop a6. And the awkward looking rook a4. So it keeps an eye on this isolated pawn and protects c4. White's got the hanging pawns, so to speak. They're called hanging pawns. And classically, it's for the recipe against hanging pawns is to try and get them to be fixed and then to sort of take them off later sometimes. Black plays knight d7 here. Why, you might ask, why get the knight away from its defensive post? Let's have a look at king h8, a deep line again, and you can see the variations in the pinned comment of this video. If you look at the comment section, check out the pinned comment. This is a very deep line. I just wanted to get the flavour of the bishop pair here in conjunction with the structural damage to see how this could evolve. You know, a kind of evolution case. How can this evolve? So this is an example. Black can threaten mate with that bishop and queen. But this kind of position with the hanging pawns, let's say white gets back that pawn, then white is structurally better with the bishop pair here. This should be an advantage, this kind of scenario. But I've checked out various other scenarios. It seems white is pretty comfortable if white is able to hold on to the pawns, take a5, as you might expect. So, yeah, knight d7. We have bishop g5, very interesting tactical response as well. It's got an element of tactics here. If f6, not that advanced, rook takes e6 is hitting the bishop. So this is unplayable for black. That's just a massive advantage. So we have actually queen b6. On queen c7, actually this is very strong for white. And you can see, you know, ploughing through the A file. So this is actually much more accurate to play queen b6 because here rook e1 is prompted, not here, because bang, bishop takes c4 is possible. Because after bishop takes, rook takes c4, and that rook's going to be hanging after rook takes c4. So this is an even position actually. So queen b6 is important. Now we have rook e1, queen b7, and the bishop's actually harassed the queen here, bishop e4, and then we have c5. So this looks like actually a dangerous pawn here, pass pawn. Here, rook a3, and it looks as though this rook is up to some naughty business in conjunction with bishop takes h7, and black plays knight f8, which does seem cautious. There's an expression, if you have a knight on f8, it's kind of more difficult to get mated. Let's have a look if the knight doesn't go back to f8. This is a fun line. Bishop takes h7 check, and it's pretty deep actually. Rook h3, threatening mate. Let's follow this through. Check. Follow this through. Bishop h6. It turns out here black's basically forced to give up the queen. And let's follow this through. F takes is more accurate than hg. Rook takes. And this is an interesting scenario in its own right to see how the assets evolve again. How does the passed pawn evolve here versus white's passed h pawn? Here's a fictional sequence. This is a very long line, but I just wanted to show you some possibilities where it seems, you know, the rooks are disconnected. The h pawn can be used as a decoy, and the black's pawn can be picked off. So we have this kind of scenario, white's getting a big advantage. So it is actually, it does turn out, it looks as though bishop takes h7 check might actually be a realistic possibility. So knight f8 is cautious but maybe justified tactically. Queen a4, so trying to recollect pawns with the bishop pair. White will in theory be better there, especially with the passed c pawn. These hanging pawns don't seem that weak in this scenario overall with the bishop pair. Bishop b7, this looks like this is transitioning now, simplification. Bishop f4, if this is not accepted, this exchange here, then it's a disaster. Bishop d6, and then losing the bishop. So this has to happen, this transaction. Rook cd8, rook d1. So maintaining d4, bishop f3, and now g3 to kick the queen back is going to happen. g3, queen c7. Rook b3, and it looks nasty, this b file, in fact. So the queen is not just attacking a5, it's always defending d4, and now with the b file, this looks as though rook b7 is horrible. Black plays rook c8 here, and actually h4 is inserted, not rook b7 just yet. Rook d7 is played by Fizbo, really positively encouraging rook b7 with benefits here. If a move like queen d8, then we can, white can push the knight back and push that pawn there, and this looks very good actually for white. This kind of scenario threatening bishop takes f7 and rook takes d8 is just a big advantage for white. It's the hanging pawns are now just one nice dangerous pawn, and yeah, the bishop's quite dominating. This is a very dominating position. So rook d7 invites, positive for the invites, rook b7. Now it should be noted that Fizbo has got a table base, and if Leela doesn't avoid the table base draws, it's going to be a draw in theory. So queen takes b7 was played. Yeah, clearly can't do this because rook takes d7. Remember the queen's on a4 supporting that. So this is queen giving up for rook and bishop. Queen takes. Now look, it looks actually here even quite fortressy. This is the problem. That blockade looks actually quite beautiful, and it looks like fortressy. Leela proceeds to this endgame scenario, getting a pair of rooks off. Now here f3, g4, so some pawn pushes over here. King comes up a bit, and yes, this seems to be a very, very difficult nut to crack. So let's just see what happens soon. Around about here, we have black playing rook d7 here just to keep hold of the a7 pawn. So if rook c6, yeah, Leela will just take the a7 pawn. So we have rook d7. Now this allows this very interesting forcing continuation now after queen c6, because it looks as though the c pawn is quite dangerous to push over rook e7, for example. But we have this, which encourages this. So we have a forcing sequence where d4 is sacrificed for this c pawn, which essentially will now win the knight. However, after all the bureaucratic checks are over, the forms are filled. Well, some of you enjoyed that little joke. Okay. Rook h2 here. Key move in this position by Leela. Queen f8 check. Not any check will do, funny enough. This check is important to win the knight. The game situation to win the knight with check. Now, if you might think queen g8, then here check. There's king h7, and this is not good because white can't play this, or it appears not to be good because then that, and black's winning. But white can actually play on with queen f8, and this position, it should be a fortress draw, I believe. So in any case, but queen f8 check is perhaps a slight improvement over queen g8. So it doesn't allow the king going to h7 away from the check. And if the king goes here, then there's queen c7 check. Forget about the knight. Just picking up the rook here. Yeah. Well, you can't. One can't take the knight here anyway because of the check. So it's about picking up the rook via queen c7. So let's go back here. So essentially, Leela picks up the knight with check, but this looks very much fortressy. Now, after a4, queen takes. It turns out this position after king g2, rook b1. Yeah, there's some commentary about this on the Leela Chess forums about what was the way to win, and I think I've answered the question because someone was asking about this position. Now, Leela played queen d7. I used a combination of Tablebase at Chess OK and Stockfish 9 locally. Now, the Tablebase worked out a certain position was a win, quite fascinating. But Leela's move is not accurate here. Okay, so this is still perhaps potentially in very difficult territory to win. And you'd think as soon as Fizbo hits its Tablebase draw, it's going to draw, right? Let me just, for the record, show you that this position is actually winning at move 80 with queen a8 check. Well, this is an example continuation. Queen f3 with a certain idea to go to f6 and play h5. So, for example, this h5. Now, a form pawn is about to be installed, so no time for rook f5 because of check and h6. So that would be really dangerous, you know, just to put that on the board for you. H6, and then we've got things like queen f8, and the form pawn is actually going to win there. You know, for example, like this, and the form pawn's checkmating. So if that's got to be avoided, right? If that's got to be avoided, just bear that in mind. So g takes. It turns out this position here, this, with black having the pawn, so queen and rook here, this can be shaked out as a win. There'll be it's like a forced checkmate in 38 moves, according to the online Tablebase. An example, you just shake off the pawn. In fact, you don't even take the pawn there. It's quicker to do this. To leave the pawn, this is a little bit amusing, I thought. Then take the pawn there. Now, this particular position, queen and rook, is winning. It is like a technical exercise to divide somehow the king from the rook, but this pattern is really fascinating because the queen's controlling g8. There's no rook g8. Then we have a check here, just winning the rook. Blah blah blah. After that, so yeah, it did seem as though this, in theory, it can be won with queen a8 check with that plan. Queen f3, queen f6, h5, g6, break up all the pawns, head for the queen and rook ending. It seems winning. Now Leela played queen d7. We have check. Now rook b3, check. And what happened now is pretty amusing because this is h5 under less favourable circumstances coming up, I have to say, because this was a question always at the back of my mind with table bases, by the way. We get this position where it's very difficult to penetrate the fortress. And here, h5, wake up. 120, move 120, h5 is played. Now, the number of pieces is coming down here to 7 piece table base. 7-man table base, they call it sometimes. 7-man. Probably usually call it 7-man. Okay. That's a bit sexist, isn't it? Okay, but anyway, G takes 7-person table base. Here, king takes h5. It should be a table base draw in this 7-person position. And I had this question in the back of my mind, especially in the tournament rules here, where it's played to the death. Is a program definitely 100% going to draw if it wants, if it's got the table base draw? Well, there's a few assumptions there. Does it actually always want to draw? Does it want to avoid repetition draws sometimes? Is there my actual question is it possible that someone somewhere might encode a table base slightly inaccurately, and all the engines are using a slightly flawed table base? I thought that's just a theoretical question. because I thought it shouldn't be possible, should it? There should be a draw because it's a table-based draw. Fizbo's using table-based. Definitely draw from here, right? Definitely. Okay. Okay, I'm going to have to Benny Hill this, fast forward. Let's look, check. Yeah, Leela just plays on and on. And in fact, what happens is eventually, yeah, I promise you there's some excitement that's going to happen here. Eventually that pawn is going to move. There. Leela gives up the pawn here, perhaps to stop the 50 move draw rule. So still draw, right? And everyone's expecting a draw, and this is tedious to watch on live stream. Well, can you imagine watching Tigger and Petrosian's hundreds of draws? It's better to see the wins after, forget about the draws. So anyway, it seems Fizbo decided to give back the pawn to reach another table-based draw. I mean, did it need to do this? I mean, I don't know. Actually, just rewind just for a moment. Couldn't the rook have stuck around? Okay, let's imagine the rook didn't need to... Fizbo gives back the pawn comically. So these engines are to Leela and its counterpart to reach this position. Fizbo's thinking, okay, it's a draw now. All Fizbo has to do is keep the checks up, actually, because if the rook's taken, it's stalemate. That's all Fizbo has to do here. So we're following this through, and I didn't watch the stream for this, thankfully. So we're following this through, the checks, until here it gets demonstrated that the check here, if takes stalemate, draw. King d2, check, yeah. If takes stalemate, check. And for some weird reason, this is a mystery. I'm not sure if it's a table-based issue as much as something crept in to Fizbo's use of the table base. Either it's the table base or something creeping in. But you see that the checks basically could have been kept up. This is the key to drawing. You just keep up the checks. Keep checking usually. But we have rook e1 being played. Yeah, rook e1 being played by black at move 209. No one's sure why. This is a mystery of the tournament. And it's just a mate in 11 now for white. Leela has a technical mate on the board in 11 with best play. Yeah. I don't know why. So we have check. And here the rook is loose after queen f4. The rook is falling off the board. Check. The rook's going to go. Check. And the rook's going. It's gone. And then the game finished. Checkmate. Okay, so yes, this is one of the most tedious games I've ever presented on the channel, but on the other hand, it has this fascinating angle about table bases. Sometimes I think bugs can creep in to computer chess. Bugs unexpected. I think the rules of the competition push that emphasis on testing everything 100%. So here it seems the use of the table base, it cracked up at some point. So that's interesting. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.